50 Famous Stories Retold by James Baldwin, Section 35, Diogenes the Wise Man. At Corinth in Greece, there lived a very wise man whose name was Diogenes. Men came from all parts of the land to see him and hear him talk, but wise as he was, he had some very queer ways. He did not believe that any man ought to have more things than he really needed, and he said that no man needed much, and so he did not live in a house, but slept in a tub or barrel, which he rolled about from place to place. He spent his days sitting in the sun and saying wise things to those who were around him. At noon one day, Diogenes was seen walking through the streets with a lighted lantern and looking all around as if in search of something. "Why do you carry a lantern when the sun is shining?" someone said. "I am looking for an honest man," answered Diogenes. When Alexander the Great went to Corinth, all the foremost men in the city came out to see him and to praise him. But Diogenes did not come, and he was the only man for whose opinions Alexander cared. And so, since the wise man would not come to see the king went to see the wise man. He found Diogenes in an out-of-the-way place, lying on the ground by his tub. He was enjoying the heat and the light of the sun. When he saw the king and a great many people coming, he sat up and looked at Alexander. Alexander greeted him and said, "Diogenes, I have heard a great deal about your wisdom. Is there anything that I can do for you?" "Yes," said Diogenes. "You can stand a little on one side, so as not to keep the sunshine from me." This answer was so different from what he expected that the king was much surprised, but it did not make him angry. It only made him admire the strange man all the more. When he turned to ride back, he said to his officers, "Say what you will. If I were not Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes."
"50 Famous Stories Retold" by James Baldwin. Section 12. The Miller of the Dee. Once upon a time there lived on the banks of the river Dee a miller who was the happiest man in England. He was always busy from morning till night, and he was always singing as merrily as any lark. He was so cheerful that he made everybody else cheerful, and people all over the land liked to talk about his pleasant ways. At last the king heard about him. "I will go down and talk with this wonderful miller," he said. "Perhaps he can tell me how to be happy." As soon as he stepped inside of the mill, he heard the miller singing, "I envy nobody, no, not I, for I am as happy as I can be, and nobody envies me." "You're wrong, my friend," said the king. "You're wrong as wrong can be. I envy you, and I would gladly change places with you if I could only be as light-hearted as you are." The miller smiled and bowed to the king. "I am sure I could not think of changing places with you, sir," he said. "Now tell me," said the king, "what makes you so cheerful and glad here in your dusty mill, while I, who am king, am sad and in trouble every day?" The miller smiled again and said, "I do not know why you are sad, but I can easily tell you why I am glad. I earn my own bread, I love my wife and my children, I love my friends and they love me, and I owe not a penny to any man. Why should I not be happy? For here is the river Dee, and every day it turns my mill, and the mill grinds the corn that feeds my wife, my babes, and me." "Say no more," said the king. "Stay where you are and be happy still, but I envy you. Your dusty cap is worth more than my golden crown. Your mill does more for you than my kingdom can do for me. If there were more such men as you, What a good place this world would be. Goodbye, my friend." The king turned about and walked sadly away, and the miller went back to his work, singing, "Oh, I'm as happy can be, for I live by the side of the river Dee."
Retold by James Baldwin, Section 11, Other Wise Men of Gotham. One day, news was brought to Gotham that the king was coming that way, and that he would pass through the town. This did not please the men of Gotham at all. They hated the king, for they knew that he was a cruel, bad man. If he came to their town, they would have to find food and lodging for him and his men, and if he saw anything that pleased him, he would be sure to take it for his own. What should they do? They met together to talk the matter over. "Let us chop down the big trees in the woods, so that they will block up all the roads that lead into the town," said one of the wise men. "Good," said all the rest. So they went out with their axes, and soon all the roads and paths to the town were filled with logs and brush. The king's horsemen would have a hard time of it getting into Gotham. They would either have to make a new road, or give up the plan altogether, and go on to some other place. When the king came and saw that the road had been blocked up, he was very angry. "Who chopped those trees down in my way?" he asked of two country lads that were passing by. "The men of Gotham," said the lads. "Well," said the king, "go and tell the men of Gotham that I shall send my sheriff into their town and have all their noses cut off." The two lads ran to the town as fast as they could and made known what the king had said. Everybody was in a great fright. The men ran from house to house carrying the news and asking one another what they should do. "Our wits have kept the king out of the town," said one, "and so now our wits must save our noses." "True, true," said the others, "but what shall we do?" Then one, whose name was Dubbin, and who was thought to be the wisest of them all, said, "Let me tell you something. Many a man has been punished because he was wise, but I have never heard of anyone being harmed because he was a fool. So when the king's sheriff comes, let us all act like fools." "Good, good," cried the others. "We will all act like fools." It was no easy thing for the king's men to open the roads, and while they were doing it, the king grew tired of waiting and went back to London. But very early one morning, the sheriff with a party of fierce soldiers rode through the woods and between the fields toward Gotham. Just before they reached the town, they saw a queer sight. The old men were rolling big stones up the hill, and all the young men were looking on and grunting very loudly. The sheriff stopped his horses and asked what they were doing. "We are rolling stones uphill to make the sun rise," said one of the old men. "You foolish fellow," said the sheriff. "Don't you know that the sun will rise without any help?" "Oh, will it?" said the old man. "Well, I never thought of that. How wise you are." "And what are you doing?" said the sheriff to the young men. "Oh, well, we do the grunting while our fathers do the working," they answered. "I see," said the sheriff. "Well, that is the way the world goes everywhere," and he rode on towards the town. He soon came to a field where a number of men were building a stone wall. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Why, master," they answered, "there is a cuckoo in this field, and we are building a wall around it so as to keep the bird from straying away." "You foolish fellow," said the sheriff. "Don't you know that the bird will fly over the top of your wall, no matter how high you build it?" "Why, no," they said. "We never thought of that. How very wise you are." The sheriff next met a man who was carrying a door on his back. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I have just started on a long journey," said the man. "But why do you carry that door?" asked the sheriff. "I left my money at home." "Then why don't you leave the door at home too?" "I was afraid of thieves, and you see, if I have the door with me, they can't break it open and get in." "You foolish fellow," said the sheriff. "It would be safer to leave the door at home and carry the money with you." "Ah, would it though?" said the man. "Now I never thought of that. You are the wisest man I have ever saw." Then the sheriff rode on with his men, but everyone they met was doing some silly thing. "Truly, I believe that the people of Gotham are all fools," said one of the horsemen. "That is true," said another. "It would be a shame to harm such simple people." "Let us ride back to London and tell the king all about them," said the sheriff. "Yes, let us do so," said the horsemen. So they went back and told the king that Gotham was a town of fools, and the king laughed and said that if that was the case, he would not harm them, but would let them keep their noses.
Stories Retold by James Baldwin. Section 8, Bruce and the Spider. There was once a king of Scotland whose name was Robert Bruce. He had need to be both brave and wise, for the times in which he lived were wild and rude. The King of England was at war with him and had led a great army into Scotland to drive him out of the land. Battle after battle had been fought. 6 times had Bruce led his brave little army against his foes, and 6 times had his men been beaten and driven into flight. At last his army was scattered, and he was forced to hide himself in the woods and in lonely places among the mountains. One rainy day, Bruce lay on the ground under a rude shed, listening to the patter of the drops on the roof above him. He was tired and sick at heart, and ready to give up all hope. It seemed to him that there was no use for him to try to do anything more. As he lay thinking, he saw a spider over his head making ready to weave her web. He watched her as she toiled slowly and with great care. 6 times she tried to throw her frail thread from one beam to another, and 6 times it fell short. "Poor thing," said Bruce, "you too know what it is to fail." But the spider did not lose hope with the 6th failure. With still more care, she made ready to try for the 7th time. Bruce almost forgot his own troubles as he watched her swing herself out upon the slender line. Would she fail again? No, the thread was carried safely to the beam and fastened there. "I too will try a 7th time," cried Bruce. He arose and called his men together. He told them of his plans and sent them out with messages of cheer to his disheartened people. Soon there was an army of brave Scotchmen around him. Another battle was fought, and the King of England was glad to go back to his own country. I have heard it said that, after that day, no one by the name of Bruce would ever hurt a spider. The lesson which the little creature had taught the king was never forgotten.
50 Famous Stories Retold by James Baldwin. Section 22, The Bell of a Tree. A tree is the name of a little town in Italy. It is a very old town and is built halfway up the side of a steep hill. A long time ago, the king of a tree bought a fine large bell and had it hung up in a tower in the marketplace. A long rope that reached almost to the ground was fastened to the bell. The smallest child could ring the bell by pulling upon this rope. "It is the bell of justice," said the king. When at last everything was ready, the people of a tree had a great holiday. All the men and women and children came down to the marketplace to look at the bell of justice. It was a very pretty bell, and was polished until it looked almost as bright and yellow as the sun. "How we should like to hear it ring," they said. Then the king came down the street. "Perhaps he will ring it," said the people, and everybody stood very still and waited to see what he would do. But he did not ring the bell. He did not even take the rope in his hands. When he came to the foot of the tower, he stopped and raised his hand. "My people," he said, "do you see this beautiful bell? It is your bell, but it must never be rung except in case of need. If any one of you is wronged at any time, he may come and ring the bell, and then the judges shall come together at once and hear his case and give him justice. Rich and poor, old and young, all alike may come, but no one must touch the rope unless he knows that he has been wronged." Many years passed by after this. Many times did the bell in the marketplace ring out to call the judges together. Many wrongs were righted, many ill-doers were punished. At last the hempen rope was almost worn out. The lower part of it was untwisted. Some of the strands were broken. It became so short that only a tall man could reach it. "This will never do," said the judges one day. "What if a child should be wronged? It could not ring the bell to let us know it." They gave orders that a new rope should be put upon the bell at once, a rope that should hang down to the ground so that the smallest child could reach it. But there was not a rope to be found in all a tree. They would have to send across the mountains for one, and it would be many days before it could be brought. What if some great wrong should be done before that time? How can the judges know about it if the injured one could not reach the old rope? "Let me fix it for you," said a man who stood by. He ran into his garden, which was not far away, and soon came back with a long grapevine in his land. "This will do for a rope," he said, and he climbed up and fastened it to the bell. The slender vine, with its leaves and tendrils still upon it, trailed to the ground. "Yes," said the judges, "it is a very good rope. Let it be as it is." Now, on the hillside above the village, there lived a man who had once been a brave knight. In his youth, he had ridden through many lands, and he had fought in many a battle. His best friend through all that time had been his horse, a strong, noble steed that had borne him safe through many a danger. But the knight, when he grew older, cared no more to ride into battle. He cared no more to do brave deeds. He thought of nothing but gold. He became a miser. At last he sold all that he had, except his horse, and went to live in a little hut on the hillside. Day after day he sat among his money bags and planned how he might get more gold, and day after day his horse stood in his bare stall, half starved and shivering with cold. "What is the use of keeping that lazy steed?" said the miser to himself one morning. "Every week it costs me more to keep him than he is worth. I might sell him, but there is not a man that wants him. I cannot even give him away. I will turn him out to shift for himself and pick grass by the roadside. If he starves to death, so much the better." So the brave old horse was turned out to find what he could among the rocks on the barren hillside. Lame and sick, he strolled along the dusty roads, glad to find a blade of grass or a thistle. The boys threw stones at him, the dogs barked at him, and in all the world there was no one to pity him. One hot afternoon, when no one was upon the street, the horse chanced to wander into the marketplace. Not a man nor child was there, for the heat of the sun had driven them all indoors. The gates were wide open, the poor beast could roam where he pleased. He saw the grapevine rope that hung from the bell of justice. The leaves and tendrils upon it were still fresh and green, for it had not been there long. what a fine dinner they would make for a starving horse. He stretched his thin neck and took one of the tempting morsels in his mouth. It was hard to break it from the vine. He pulled at it, and the great bell above him began to ring. All the people in a tree heard it. It seemed to say, "Someone has done me wrong. Someone has done me wrong. Oh, come and judge my case. Oh, come and judge my case, for I've been wronged." The judges heard it. They put on their robes and went out through the hot streets to the marketplace. They wondered who it could be who would ring the bell at such a time. When they passed through the gate, they saw the old horse nibbling at the wine. "Ha!" cried one. "It is the miser's steed. He has come to call for justice, for his master, as everybody knows, has treated him most shamefully." "He pleads his cause as well as any dumb brute can," said another. "And he shall have justice," said the third. Meanwhile, a crowd of men and women and children had come into the marketplace, eager to learn what cause the judges were about to try. When they saw the horse, all stood still in wonder. Then everyone was ready to tell how they had seen him wandering in the hills, unfed, uncared for, while his master sat at home counting his bags of gold. "Go bring the miser before us," said the judges. And when he came, they bade him stand and hear their judgment. "This horse has served you well for many a year," they said. "He has saved you from many a peril. He has helped you gain your wealth. Therefore we order that 1/2 of your gold shall be set aside to buy him shelter and food, a green pasture where he may graze, and a warm stall to comfort him in his old age." The miser hung his head and grieved to lose his gold, but the people shouted with joy, and the horse was led away to his new stall and a dinner such as he had not had in many a day. Famous Stories Retold by James Baldwin, Section 31, Damon and Pythias. A young man, whose name was Pythias, had done something which the tyrant Dionysius did not like. For this offense he was dragged to prison, and the day was set when he should be put to death. His home was far away, and he wanted very much to see his father and mother and friends before he died. "Only give me leave to go home and say goodbye to those whom I love," he said, "and then I will come back and give up my life." The tyrant laughed at him. "How can I know that you will keep your promise?" he said. "You only want to cheat me, to save yourself." Then a young man whose name was Damon spoke and said, "O king, put me in prison in place of my friend Pythias, and let him go to his own country to put his affairs in order, and to bid his friends farewell. I know that he will come back as he promised, for he is a man who has never broken his word. But if he is not here on the day which you have set, then I will die in his stead." The tyrant was surprised that anybody should make such an offer. He at last agreed to let Pythias go, and gave orders that the young man Damon should be shut up in prison. Time passed, and by the day drew near which had been set for Pythias to die, and he had not come back. The tyrant ordered the jailer to keep close watch upon Damon and not let him escape. But Damon did not try to escape. He still had faith in the truth and honor of his friend. He said, "If Pythias does not come back in time, it will not be his fault. It will be because he is hindered against his will." At last the day came, and then the very hour. Damon was ready to die. His trust in his friend was as firm as ever, and he said that he did not grieve at having to suffer for one whom he loved so much. Then the jailer came to lead him to his death, but at the same moment Pythias stood in the door. He had been delayed by storms and shipwreck, and he had feared that he was too late. He greeted Damon kindly, and then gave himself into the hands of the jailer. He was happy because he thought that he had come in time, even though it was at the last moment. The tyrant was not so bad, but that he could see good in others. He felt that men who loved and trusted each other, as did Damon and Pythias, ought not to suffer unjustly, and so he set them both free. "I would give all my wealth to have one such friend," he said. Famous Stories Retold by James Baldwin. Section 42, The Endless Tale. In the Far East there was a great king who had no work to do. Every day and all day long he sat on soft cushions and listened to stories, and no matter what the story was about, he never grew tired of hearing it, even though it was very long. "There is only one fault that I find with your story," he often said. "It is too short." All the storytellers in the world were invited to his palace, and some of them told tales that were very long indeed, but the king was always sad when a story was ended. At last, he sent word into every city and town and country place, offering a prize to anyone who should tell him an endless tale. He said, "To the man that will tell me a story which shall last forever, I will give my fairest daughter for his wife, and I will make him my heir, and he shall be king after me." But this was not all. He added a very hard condition. "If any man shall try to tell such a story and then fail, he shall have his head cut off." The king's daughter was very pretty, and there were many young men in that country who were willing to do anything to win her, but none of them wanted to lose their heads, and so only a few tried for the prize. One young man invented a story that lasted 3 months, but at the end of that time he could think of nothing more. His fate was a warning to others, and it was a long time before another storyteller was so rash as to try the king's patience. But one day a stranger from the south came into the palace. "Great king," he said, "is it true that you offer a prize to the man who can tell a story that has no end?" "It is true," said the king. "And shall this man have your fairest daughter for his wife, and shall he be your heir?" "Yes, if he succeeds," said the king, "but if he fails, he shall lose his head." "Very well then," said the stranger. "I have a pleasant story about locusts, which I would like to relate." "Tell it," said the king. "I will listen to you." The storyteller began his tale. Once upon a time, a certain king seized upon all the corn in his country and stored it away in a strong granary. But a swarm of locusts came over the land and saw where the grain had been put. After searching for many days, they found on the east side of the granary a crevice that was just large enough for one locust to pass through at a time. So one locust went in and carried away a grain of corn. Then another locust went in and carried away a grain of corn. Then another locust went in and carried away a grain of corn. Day after day, week after week, the man kept on saying, "Then another locust went in and carried away a grain of corn." A month passed. A year passed. At the end of 2 years, the king said, "How much longer will the locusts be going in and carrying away corn?" "O king," said the storyteller, "they have as yet cleared only 1 cubit, and there are many thousand cubits in the granary." "Man, man," cried the king, "you will drive me mad. I can listen to it no longer. Take my daughter, be my heir, rule my kingdom, but do not let me hear another word about those horrible locusts." And so the strange storyteller married the king's daughter, and he lived happily in the land for many years. But his father-in-law, the king, did not care to listen to any more stories.